questions, a realization begins to emerge, okay? If I can bring this up. All right, so no single finite actuality, it would seem, can account for the infinite general potentiality of the universe. After all, an actual entity is finite, and it emerges as an actualization of these possibilities. All right, no single finite actually can provide relevant potentialities for its own emergence. Right? Rather, it's going to choose among these potentialities as already given in experience, already presented with. Okay, similarly, no finite actual entity itself harbors possibilities of radical novelty, which transcend its own past, right? But it's confronted with them as options in the process of becoming. So Whitehead faces this real question. Okay, to what actual entity do we refer the location, the locus, with all its limitations, thanks, Ron, and ordered relevance of these infinite possibilities? How do we make sense of the relevance of the world process? Okay, either you have a couple options, I suppose. You refer infinite possibility to some sort of actual entity that itself is infinite and eternal, right, to account for the eternity of possibility, or you simply let possibilities float in a void in some way, whatever that might mean. Okay, we're facing, notice, like, normal people don't ask these sorts of questions. You realize that Whitehead has this remarkable ability to meditate on human experience, the emergence of each occasion. It's really remarkable to think about in a certain sense. Okay, so but let's think for a moment. Even if possibilities were floating in a void, let's say they don't need to be anywhere. They don't need any relation to an actual entity or actuality. That alone wouldn't solve the issues, okay? Because they can't themselves do anything, it seems. Because Whitehead calls it, they're abstract, right? And part of what it means to be abstract is to be causally inert. You can't do anything, right? So let's give an example. 2 + 2 = 4. This is an abstract mathematical truth. But that abstract mathematical truth by itself has never put $4 in your pocket. You do that as an agent, as an actuality, right? That requires some agental active move. Okay. Similarly, possibilities they're not subjects. They're not actual agents. They're not becoming. They're ingredients in becoming. They're abstract objects, right? Eternal objects. Okay. So what is more, they cannot alone limit themselves. We're back to this language of limitation. We're going to get into what that sort of means. Okay, they can't limit themselves as relevant to the world process. In which does possibility choose itself to present to an occasion out of the infinite possibilities what could be? Rather, they're limited, they're rendered effective by something actual or agental. And that's all that Whitehead's getting at with the ontological principle. That actuality has to be involved if possibility is going to be effective in the world in a deep way. All right, so this limitation, this efficacy of possibilities constitute other key problems. So he's pointing to the locus, the location, the relevance, the limitation, the efficacy. He finds that possibility is pervasive in this way, and it requires some sort of explanation. Okay, remember, we're talking about the philosophical functions. So he gives a couple examples of this limitation on infinite abstract possibility. Remember, I think it was Jill, who brought up the problem of people having limited possibilities, right, in a negative sense. I think Kierkegaard even makes the case that the definition of despair in some sense is having no possibility, right? Possibilities being limited. Okay, but possibilities also can be limited in a positive sense. Whitehead says the proper limitation of possibility is essential to the growth of reality. Anything can't go. There has to be parameters, there has to be limitations, proper limitation in order for something to occur, in order for something to happen. So let's go look at one example, and I'll read this for us. And it's an example of the limitation of possibility. So the spatio-temporal relationship, in terms of which the actual course of events is to be expressed, is nothing else than a selective limitation within the general systematic relationships among eternal possibilities. By limitation, I mean those matter-of-fact determinations, such as the 3 dimensions of space and the 4 dimensions of the spatio-temporal continuum, which present themselves as arbitrary in respect to a more abstract possibility. Okay, this is great, arbitrary. This language of selective limitation, right? A limitation that seems to be selected for, in some sense, out of the infinite abstract wealth of what could be. For example, it didn't have to be this way. Like, why on earth is there 3 dimensions, and not 18 or 7 or anything else that could be in their place? This seems to be a kind of limitation on possibility, what could be, that allows for the universe itself to emerge, or at least a universe like ours. Okay, hang with me. Here's a couple examples. So in cosmology, you'll have heard of some of the quote-unquote fine-tuning, right, of these constants that the cosmologists and physicists point to, okay? The strong, the weak force, gravity, electromagnetism, we're not going to get into it, but that are set in certain parameters in such a way that if they were different, the likelihood of us being here is almost certainly 0, right? Presumably they could have been different, right? And yet there seem to be limitations on what could be, limitations on possibility that allow for the possibility, the emergence of our universe and everything that we are. Okay, so this is an example of this kind of selective limitation. So Whitehead then finds that all these and similar metaphysical problems of possibility point to a vision of God and God's function as an infinite actual entity that uniquely grounds the location, the relevance, the limitation, the efficacy of possibility for the world process. Okay, and then the ultimate limitations that we're speaking of, which in some sense make our cosmic epoch possible, which make the emergence of every event possible, which make the emergence of every moment in some sense of your experience possible, have to be the result of a decision in some way. And this decision has to be, according to the ontological principle, not from nowhere, since something has happened, something's been effective, but something actual. Okay, the scope of the ontological principle is not exhausted by the corollary that decision must be referable to an actual entity. Everything must be somewhere. And here, somewhere means some actual entity. Accordingly, the general potentiality of the universe must be somewhere, since it retains its proximate relevance to the actual entities for which it's unrealized. This somewhere is the non-temporal actual entity, the primordial mind of God. Eternal objects, right, or eternal possibilities, as in God's primordial nature, constitute the Platonic world of ideas. Okay, now let me just pause to say, we've already said something about Plato, who's a significant influence for Whitehead and all of European Western thought. But he's not just restating Plato. Remember, he's going to have some qualms about just saying, well, they're Platonic ideas. But something, the primordial nature is that dimension of God which grounds, limits, values infinite possibility. God is the answer to the riddles of possibility and their relationship to the world. Any questions?